Hello, boys and girls. I wanted to share with you one of my favorite fairy tales today, Little Red Riding Hood. So I'll be doing a read aloud of this for you today. You can either listen to my read aloud, you can watch the video of Little Red Riding Hood. That's right inside the fairy tale quiz, or you can do both. They might be a little bit different versions of the story, so it might be fun to hear both of them and see how they're the same and how they're different. Before we start the book, just a little reminder, we looked at our poster the other day. We're still focused on fairy tales, and pretty soon we'll be adding in, we'll talk about fantasy and realistic fiction like we did in the classroom. But just to remind your brain, a fairy tale is a story that is made up. It's usually full of magic and has a plot of good against evil. What does evil mean? What's a synonym for evil? Synonym for evil would be bad, right? There's good characters and there's bad characters. So we probably already know the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Who's the good character in Little Red Riding Hood? If you said Little Red Riding Hood, you are correct. She's also the main character. So we'll notice in fairy tales that the main characters are usually the good characters. Who is the bad character in Little Red Riding Hood? Did you say the wolf? You're right. The wolf is definitely the bad character in Little Red Riding Hood. The fairy tales often have the numbers 3 and 7 in them. Not always, but you will see that a lot. You might hear the story start off with once upon a time. And how does it usually end, boys and girls? Happily ever after. You might see a prince or a princess, a king or queen in a fairy tale. Sometimes they live in a castle or a faraway place like the woods, a faraway forest, faraway land. It happened a long, long time ago. And like we already talked about, there's good and evil in a fairy tale. So let's take a quick listen to Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood. In a faraway wood, you hear that? It's far, far away woods, lived a kind girl named Little Red Riding Hood. So we already know that Little Red Riding Hood is good, right? What word in that first sentence tells us that she's good? It says she is a kind girl. So the word kind is a synonym for good. She was taking a basket of food to her sick grandma. Remember, said her mother, go straight to Grandma's house. Don't stray off the path and don't talk to any strangers. Little Red Riding Hood set off to see her grandma. Little Red Riding Hood followed the path that wound through the woods. She hummed a little tune as she swung her basket of goodies. She saw lots of pretty blue flowers, but she didn't see the wolf hiding in the tree. Little Red Riding Hood stopped to look at the blue flowers. Can you make a prediction about what might happen next, boys and girls? Tell someone your prediction or say it out loud. Hello, little girl, said the big bad wolf. What are you doing? Little Red Riding Hood jumped with fright. I'm going to see my sick grandma who lives in the little house in the woods, she said. What kind of girl you are? He smiled, showing his big white teeth. I'm sure your grandma will like these pretty blue flowers. Why don't you stay and pick some for her? The big bad wolf ran off into the woods. So what rule did Little Red Riding Hood already break that her mom had given her? Do you remember who her mom told her not to talk to? Don't talk to strangers, right? While Little Red Riding Hood stayed to pick some blue flowers, the big bad wolf ran all the way to Grandma's house and gobbled her up. Well, we definitely know who's the bad character now. He put on Grandma's cap and glasses. What's a cap, boys and girls? What's a synonym for cap? It's a hat, right? Hat and cap are synonyms. They mean the same thing. The big bad wolf got into Grandma's bed. Soon after, Little Red Riding Hood arrived at Grandma's house. The door was wide open, so Little Red Riding Hood walked in. "Are you in bed, Grandma?" she called out. Little Red Riding Hood went into the bedroom. She walked up to the bed. Grandma wasn't looking very well. "Oh, Grandma," she said, "what big ears you have." "All the better to hear you with, my dear," said the wolf in a grandma voice. Grandma had very big ears. "Oh, Grandma," said Little Red Riding Hood, "what big eyes you have." "All the better to see you with, my dear," said the wolf in his grandma voice. Little Red Riding Hood thought Grandma looked strange. "Oh, Grandma," said Little Red Riding Hood, "what big teeth you have." "All the better to eat you with," growled the wolf, and he opened his mouth wide and leaped at Little Red Riding Hood. The big bad wolf ate Little Red Riding Hood. Luckily, a woodcutter was passing Grandma's cottage. He went in to visit Grandma and found the big bad wolf taking a nap. He bashed the wolf with his axe, then he turned the wolf upside down and gave him a good shake. Out came Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood. Grandma, Little Red Riding Hood, and the woodcutter, waving his axe, all chased the big bad wolf. The big bad wolf ran away, and they never saw him again. And sometimes this story ends with, "and they lived happily ever after." So when we're talking about good characters in this book, we know Little Red Riding Hood's a good character. Who else on this page is a good character? Grandma's pretty good character, but what about this guy? He's really important, right? The woodcutter? If it weren't for the woodcutter, no one would have saved Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood. So he's a very good character. That is the end. All right, boys and girls, I want you to take a minute to watch the video of Little Red Riding Hood also, if you can, and then go ahead and answer the few questions on the Little Red Riding Hood quiz. Talk to you soon.